As we start to explore this whole world of AR, I want to look at the big immersive media picture to start with. How would you describe immersive media?
We're just discussing that, but would you like to repeat?
It is augmented and virtual reality. It includes you use tools to visualize something that doesn't exist.
Okay, to visualize something that doesn't exist. Anybody else have other ways of describing that?
It makes us kind of be part of the story and not just watch it, but rather be inside.
Be inside that. Yeah, I love that. Those are great launching points. I'll share the notes with you afterwards, although these are mainly just pictures to keep me on a thought processes as we're going through this. As we sort of explore or experiential media, it's a form of storytelling and a media that takes the user into an alternate reality and places where virtual objects exist. Depending on the type of immersed media that we're looking at, this could be something where the whole world around us becomes this virtual space, or where we're getting layers that are added on top of augmentation, virtual layers that are added on top of what actually exists in our real world. Right now, the crux to the whole thing is basically creating experiences that makes tangible something that is not. You mentioned two of those forms of immersive media when we just spoke, virtual reality and augmented reality. And there is a third, and that's called mixed reality. That one really has me excited because that one kind of mixes the virtual with the real world, like augmented reality does, but it takes it a step further where you can actually then manipulate in some way those virtual elements. Did any of you experience Museum Eye at the Egyptian Museum? I don't know if it's still there, but they did a whole experience at the Egyptian Museum in which they used the HoloLens, which is a mixed reality glass. And using the HoloLens, you could be toured through the museum by Tutankhamun. The world around you within the museum transformed to include, I believe, some Egyptian gods and goddesses and a bit of storytelling as you went through the museum. So something to look up to see. I was trying to figure out last night if it was still open or was still happening there or not, and I couldn't quite tell. But that's kind of exciting because like the HoloLens itself is one of the more cutting edge areas of immersive media. We've mentioned virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality. How would you describe virtual reality?
When you go into a reality that's not in the real world.
Yeah. So when you go into reality that's not in the real world, so the whole area around you changes. How about augmented reality?
It's when the reality comes to you. So the objects come to you, to your environment or the space you are in.
Yeah, so it's adding layers on top of the reality that we're looking at. So I was at a friend of mine's place in California last week, and I was looking up and playing with some augmented reality that they were sharing from the tar pits that are near his house. These tar pits, prehistoric creatures that lived there and got trapped in the tar. So they've got the fossilized remains of things like mammoths. So here, as I was in his space, I had a mammoth that was walking around his living room. So that's augmented reality. And then mixed reality, I just shared it with you. It's kind of that newest form of immersive media, and it allows those real and virtual elements to interact with one another and users to be able to interact with those virtual elements in a similar way to the way they would in the real world, kind of like the way we right now interact with touch screens, but hopefully later on it'll become even more immersive. With mixed reality, they've been doing a lot of work with it in medical education, for example, like where people can use this HoloLens that I was talking about. It's a particular mixed reality headset that they were using at the Egyptian Museum. And they can use it to get involved in things like medical procedures and practice different operations. The one that they've got at UBC, which is near my house, they've got what they call the hollow brain there, and it allows you to take apart the brain and examine different parts of it and look at what's under different layers and move those things around. So it's kind of that exciting next step. As we start to look at all these things, right now with how the technologies are working, there are pluses and minuses. It has, just like this picture of this girl here where she's opening the book and everything's jumping out and coming to life. There's that sense of magic and possibility. But we're also in this zone right now where there's problems with how all of that pans out. You're a class of storytellers and artists. This actually holds a lot of potential because one of the big pieces that's been missing in here are those story elements. To bring a project that utilizes these things together, you have to bring the different people to the table. That means you need to have the people who understand how to build and work with the technology, as well as the storytellers and the artists all coming together. So I'm going to take you through a project that I've been working on. One of the big things that I discovered early on in the project is that there's still a little bit of that chip on the shoulder from the technology world and that storytelling world of filmmakers and journalists and people like that, where there's the one side, and it could go either way, but the one side has control issues and feels threatened by the other side. I think there's like a lot of butting of heads that way, but it lends to the opportunity that if you can find a better way to work through these problems and build solutions together with people, and you can also start to learn and teach yourself how to manage the different parts of a project so that you learn the language on both sides, there becomes this opportunity to be that person that creates the magic. So I'm going to take you through my story with that, and also exploring a number of different augmented reality experiences around the world, reflecting on what's working about those and what's not working from my perspective as I go through those experiences to figure out where those opportunities lie to create that magic and to open up all sorts of opportunities for you. Where my story began with all of this is I was presented with a problem by the Juno Beach Center. It's a Canadian museum, but it actually exists in France. So it's right where the D-Day landings were in World War II in France. And they were finding that there was a problem that school children today were disconnected with what happened in World War II. And they wanted to find new ways of connecting, in this case, specifically Canadian school children with stories from World War II. I had the opportunity in 2019 in that I was over in France. So I went to visit the museum and to start exploring around and seeing what they had there to see what I could create that was different. At that moment in time, they were actually approaching me for some web series I was doing. But as I started to go around this museum is just awesome. The different ways that they're telling stories in this museum is just incredible, through audio, through video, through all sorts of ways that people can physically interact with things and have different experiences that take you back to World War II, exploring some of the elements that led to that horrific event and the end of that horrific event. I'm not sure how much of World War II history you're familiar with, but D-Day would have been when everything started to come to an end in the war. So as I was thinking about this, I'm like, okay, they don't need anything more for this museum. But as I went out the doors and was exploring the rest of Normandy, France, there's what they call the Maple Leaf Trails. And the Maple Leaf Trails were the roots of the Canadian soldiers. The Canadian soldiers' role after D-Day was they cleaned up the bombs in the area. So they were more of a peacekeeping force that was there to clean things up and make things safe there again for the French people. As I started talking to the people in Normandy in France, and started finding people that were children at the time to connect with, and as they started to tell me these stories, they were more human stories. They weren't the stories of battlefields. I really wasn't interested in the stories of battlefields. So I started thinking about, okay, these are the stories that aren't being told at the moment. So how could these stories be told? And then there's this whole other area in Normandy called Dieppe, which as a storyteller, the kid that liked the spy novels and everything like that when I was younger. Dieppe, actually, the Canadian soldiers there were spies, and they were there before D-Day, and they were helping the French resistance in the area to slowly have little wins to take back the country. So I'm thinking, okay, well, there's a museum in Dieppe that explores some of this, but how could we explore and bring this to life on the streets themselves? This got me to start to think about, what if, as you're traveling through those areas, you're able to bring up a tablet or a smartphone and have these scenes that take you back into the past? What if a spy actually is able to come up and start to chat with you or whisper in your ear as you're peering behind a corner? That's what I started to explore. Some of the things that we wanted is we wanted it to be an immersive and experiential experience. We wanted it to be story focused, create connections to people from the past, instill empathy. The instill empathy part was a really big one for us. We tend to focus a lot of our storytelling around things to do with social good and things to get people thinking and laughing, but also thinking in a way that, like, how can we use our storytelling to do good out there and to change the world in a positive way? I think when we're looking at stories from World War II, one of the big things and one of the reasons why it's so important not to forget time periods like that is so we don't repeat them. And those layers of empathy in there are really important. We wanted to also get people experiencing it from a different perception. When I was speaking with the French people, like the people who lived, that were children there at the time, what hit me was so many of the layers of stories and the ways they shared those stories, and even in different areas based on their experiences. It really hit me hard that there was still so much anger and grief and guilt that I was hearing from the different people, because they were occupied at the time, because some people had to make decisions that were about survival at the time that maybe they wouldn't have made in a time period where they didn't have to worry about their own survival. There was all these different layers. I wanted to find ways of sharing that. And I wanted to find ways of sharing that we don't just see things in black and white of the good and the bad. With that, the neighborhood where I live is on Canada's west coast. And people who lived here at the time who were of Japanese ancestry, including my friend Manami's family, who weren't a part of the Japanese forces in World War II or anything like that. They were Canadians. Yet, because of their ancestry, they actually lost, like, it was a fishing village, a Japanese fishing village that's just down the road from me. And they actually lost their boats and they were forced inland off the coast and some into internment camps just because of their ancestry. These are the kind of stories in looking at these different perspectives that we wanted to bring to life. So I shared a bit of the vision of being able to access that through these devices. That led me to start to explore, okay, how are different people telling these stories in AR at the moment? And what can we do differently, or how can we bring our stories to life so that they really pop? So there's all sorts of different layers to this. And because I was traveling at the time, I had the opportunity to check this out in different countries. So this is in Switzerland. This was at a resort property that I was at. I noticed as I was going out on a hike the one morning that on the board, it was sharing an AR experience that was on this hike. So I thought, oh, great. And downloaded the app and started out on the hike to have this experience. It really represented one of the areas that I think has been happening the last few years, where people do AR to say, oh, we're cool, we're doing AR, but there's not a point to it. In this case, you could download the app and you get to these different checkpoints and you could scan the QR code and it would bring up this AR experience. Well, what the AR experience was the exact same information that was on the beautiful interpretive sign that they had at the exact same place on the trail. So why would I need to use this when there is a sign right there with all the pictures and all the same information with the beautiful views behind? It made no sense. And it meant that I was really disappointed. I kept trying as I went up, hoping that magically one of them would have something more. But no, it's all written word. And it was the exact same as the interpretive sign that was prettier. There was this other experience that I was able to, I'm just going to exit this a second because I'm going to bring up a video. This experience, Tremona Castello Archaeological Park, is on this hilltop, and it's basically a medieval village that they found on the area that sort of borders onto Italy and Switzerland. They wanted to turn this into a living history museum, but they were turned down by the local municipality about turning it into a living history museum. So they had this idea to start working with one of the local universities instead to create an augmented reality experience. The way they've envisioned it is super, super exciting. I'll show you that right now. That I was super, super excited by, and I really wanted to have that experience. However, what's actually happening there right now is, so you've got these headsets. This is all outdoors, open and free to go up to the park. But in order to get the headsets, you've got to go when the visitor center is opened. And because it's in a small village in Switzerland, when that visitor center is opened is not all the time. It's a bit rare because it's a smaller place. But also, you've got this glass. And if you're someone like me who's got glasses on, that glass, the way it sits on top of your glasses, is really uncomfortable. Then as you walk up the hill, your audio starts, and you have to keep pace with the audio as you go up the hill. And if you want to listen to something again, you can't. You have to continue going with the pace of the audio. As you enter the top of the hill, I wanted to see those gates almost in ghostly form and walk through them. And I wanted to see people walking around. That's not what's currently happening. They have a couple of different spots that you have to go to along the way. And the only movement that you're seeing in any given scene is wisps of smoke. So it's basically audio storytelling with these still scenes with maybe a little bit of movement, like a wisp of smoke coming up. I was disappointed. And then to top that all off, if you look here, there's some trees around the edges, but there's no trees in the middle part. So if you're up there on a sunny day, which I was, you are stuck in the sun because you have to follow along at their rate, as opposed to stopping and pausing things and going back and taking in the experience that you want to do at your own time. I would have loved that ability to have moments in the real world and then moments in that AR space, which felt a little bit more like, because of the glasses, it almost masked that real world experience as I was doing it. So it unfortunately left me disappointed. I personally think that this would work really well through this, as opposed to that, where you could pause things as you go up. The audio storytelling was good, but I'd like to have it through this where I could see everything better too, because that was the other thing. It's a very narrow lens, and you can't necessarily see everything. That you're kind of fidgeting around with the glass to make sure that you're seeing the scene in front of you. I think that's a big hiccup with those glasses at the moment. It limits people's accessibility because a lot of people don't have headsets, and even if they rent them, then it limits the accessibility of when you can visit and have the experience. It does have potential. For me, it was looking at, okay, what's working here, what's not, and where is there an opportunity? Now, the reason with this, why they didn't have, because this actually was their initial idea, was to be able to view it all through a device. Their concern is that they were going to need to have it working off of Wi-Fi. And because they're right by the Italian border, people on their tablets and smart devices, it'll jump between networks. So it'll end up on the Italian network and people get charged more. So that was the concern. However, there's this, and this is where I started thinking about it. And it's why when I was talking back here, I mentioned GPS triggered augmented reality, because there's a way that they've been doing this with audio storytelling and audio tours, especially for travelers, where you download the app before you leave your house. And when you get to those areas, if you've opened the app, when you get to those areas, different things will pop up and audio will pop up and start telling you a story based on where you are. And you can be totally in airplane mode on your device while you're doing that. That's what I would love to see happen with an experience like this, where it can be GPS triggered and people can enjoy it through their smartphones. That's my personal preferences. There was another one I saw in Switzerland, and this is another big hiccup that's happening with a lot of AR out there at the moment. I read about this on their website before I went, so I was wanting to check it out when I got there. When I got to this Roman village that's in the area of Basel in Switzerland, the people at the museum didn't know about this. I ended up finding some little bits and pieces on signage throughout the open air museum, and I tried to get it working, but every single time I'd pull it up, nothing would happen. I'm guessing what's happened there is that, and probably why the staff that I spoke to didn't know about it, is they probably were having problems with the app, and rather than working through and figuring out a solution, they just stop sharing about it and they stop sort of servicing it. A lot of these are coming out at the moment where they're working with one of the local universities. And so the university kind of works through the project. It's a project why the students are getting their grades and why they have funding. And then as soon as they've been able to write about it, then they're dropping the project. So it doesn't get further maintained. So that's been a bit of a problem at some of these, especially in Switzerland, where a lot of these were kind of led by the local university. Now, flip side, I'm going to show you an experience that the Art Gallery of Toronto put on that was just awesome. So this is called Reblink.
Oh, we have a suspicious person. Over.
This is really cool.
They're getting closer. Over.
That was a huge hit when the exhibition was there. And it was a huge hit because it worked. People were able to easily access it in the museum, and it kind of got them looking at art in both a contemporary way, but also where they started to look at it in a really playful way, where it opened up them looking at art in an imaginative storytelling way. I recently got to, when I was in Ontario last, got to see another art-based art experience. This one was actually created in Jordan, and it's been traveling all around the world. The idea, it's called Seeing the Invisible. And the idea is in these different places throughout the gardens, they had these different art structures. You could move through the art and in some cases walk right into the art, and you'd have these different experiences with the art. The problem was I went with my niece who's here. We both had our devices and we were all looking forward to kind of experiencing it together, each in a different way. But it wasn't actually working. on the different devices. So I gather they're having a problem with any Apple devices. I had an iPhone and so did Marley. So what wasn't working on our devices, we had to come back and you could trade them your driver's license for one of their tablets. But their tablets, because they are worried about the public dropping them, had these masks on the top, but the masks made it more difficult to see the augmented reality. And it was quite finicky in getting it to work. So the idea was you moved it around over top of these circles on the ground, and then the experience popped up on the device. But the other problem was, again, they did all this all in sunny areas. They had a lot of trees in this park, but none of them were under the trees. So again, hot day, we were out in the sun the entire time. And added to that, because of these screens that they had on these tablets that we could borrow, the way the screen was reflecting the light, it made it really difficult to see the experience, especially now that we were both sharing a device. There were some cool things about it. Unfortunately, I was having trouble getting pictures of it because of this protective screen that was reflecting off the light. But what Marley had in front of her here was the virtual piano. You can just see little bits and pieces of it here. But the really cool part was what was around it. You were getting this beautiful music, and there was butterflies and birds whooshing down. I think a second later, Marley narrowly got missed by a virtual bird flying down on top of her, which was a lovely magical experience, but we didn't really get it in an immersive way because of these hiccups with the technology, and almost with the fact that when setting this up, because the people there might not have had the experience themselves, they hadn't thought about these different pieces from a user experience. That's a key thing that I think is happening here is that user experience has been a little tough as we've been starting into these experiences. While we were there, I saw this other augmented reality game that was happening in one of their other parks nearby. Unfortunately, Marley couldn't join me because she got hit with COVID, but I went and had the experience in this other garden on another day by myself. And while the layers of augmented reality to it weren't great, I had an awesome experience because the story they told as I went through the park was a good one. And it got me to explore the park, which I hadn't actually been to, and I found it was a beautiful park. But they also had all these little things that I learned something about an area that was about a mile down the road from where I spent my high school years and had no idea about. So this was a really great experience. Basically, I was supposed to solve and try to figure out what the mystery tree was. After the first clue, I was fairly certain I knew what the mystery tree was just because I've got a background as a biologist, and I was right. But as I followed this map of objects through the garden, and this actually worked the way I want my app to work, where it was triggered as I went through different spaces in the garden by where I was. And so when I hit a trigger, like a GPS triggered spot, up would pop a new clue or a new little story. The part that was disappointing to me is that they were all just static images in written words. And there was parts where it said that there was audio attached, but every single time I click, I'd get no audio. So I would have loved if I could have heard some stories in audio, if perhaps there was some actual augmented layers that could have gone across what was in front of me on the screen. Things like that would have made this an even richer experience. But I did enjoy the story, and I learned all sorts of new things that made me smile. It was a good probably 2 hours that I spent going through the gardens on this particular app. All of this brings me to looking at where's the opportunity here. From some of the things that we talked about I just explored just now, what are people seeing as some of the challenges that are out there with these technologies right now?
So expensive, and it contains so many details. So
this was what was hitting me. And so I initially thought that I needed a grant to get this going. So that was one of my barriers, because I knew what I wanted, but I thought I needed a grant. And I thought I needed other people to be creating pieces of this that would cost a lot of money, like game designers and app designers and things like that. Other hiccups that people are seeing.
Internet access, as you mentioned.
Yeah, internet access. One of the big hiccups right now, too, is that augmented reality takes up a lot of space on your phones. So that's been part of the hiccup in getting the GPS aspect to work, although it does, because if you look at Pokemon games, that's augmented reality. And well, that probably doesn't actually, I think you have to be connected to the internet for that one. But there are some out there where you can download and then it's just GPS triggered as you go. But it takes up a lot of space on your phone. Other hiccups?
Not
Or
everyone
challenges?
is familiar with the technology, so you might need some people to explain the technology to the visitors, and not all visitors, like you have to make something compatible with most devices, and there are like different types of devices. So yeah, you might be facing this as well.
All of those problems that you mentioned were the big ones that I was seeing this summer when I was taking in that experience at the gardens near my house. The majority of people visiting the gardens were older, so they were much less familiar with these sorts of technologies, and they had somebody helping them get started, but because the technology wasn't working properly, that was creating an added layer of difficulty to the whole mix as they were getting people started on this. Then they had these signs going into the gardens that showed what you should be seeing, but no context to how to find that or how one goes about seeing that. So the signs almost confuse people a little bit more. These are all the hiccups going into this thing. How do we overcome these? Some of my research has been looking around at different companies that will do these different things. Right now, because there hasn't been a tremendous number of people that understand story that have been developing on this side. A lot of the developers who are building this stuff now are only working with industries because that's where they're finding the money. So they're working with mining industry, they're working with the medical industry, they're working with industries where they can be using these AR technologies to be doing training of workers with machines and things like that. They're not regularly working with storytellers or with artists or people like that because they don't make as much money at it. That's a huge hiccup right now. I'd found the company that could do what I wanted to do in Vancouver, actually, but doing anything with storytellers because it's not their money side. So that's a problem. Then when I started talking with a younger developer who'd done stuff on the gaming side and was interested in that side, I discovered that he didn't want to work with my cinematographer because he saw her as a threat. He saw the filmmaker in the whole picture as a threat, and he kind of wanted to control the whole project. And really, he just wanted me finding the source of income to pay the bills, which as a storyteller, that took all the fun out of it for me. These are all the different hiccups that are happening. There are areas of funding. Some of them, though, are tied to big companies like Niantic, and you do have to understand that you're basically developing you have to really be careful with the contracts to make sure that if it's something that you want to carry into the future, that you're not just developing all of that for them. Now, the beauty here is if you dig a little deeper, there's actually ways that you can start to learn the technology side. So the technology side for a lot of this is actually based on game design. And Unreal Engine and Unity, who are the two big ones that people are creating things, both in virtual reality and augmented reality, they have all these courses online for free for students and educators. So I've done up a Google Doc for you, and I've given you links to where you can access those resources. What I've been doing with my team so far is we're going through, and our storytelling team is going through the process of teaching ourselves how to build all these different elements ourselves. Because the idea in mind with all of this is if we understand and we've done it and we've created ourselves on a certain level, then when we pull in those partnerships with any tech teams later on, we understand what's possible, what's not possible, what we're asking them to do, and we understand their language. We're doing this right now on a small scale where we're going to do it with WebAR just in our neighborhood here, looking at World War II stories from Japanese Canadians, reflecting back on what happened during that time period. I connected at an event with one of the tourism boards who actually wants to start creating this. So we might actually find parcels of money to start building this. But we're going to start with just an installation. Now, our big cost for this at the moment is because we want to create some ghostly figures in this. And to do that at the moment, what people are using is they're using motion capture suits to do that. I have now been waiting for our motion capture suit because of the supply chain and development issues out of China right now. I've been waiting for it since May. Apparently it's on its way, but it's stuck at Canadian Customs. Hopefully we'll have it soon. Then what we'll do is we'll create a mixture of things within these pieces where we'll have our ghostly figures. Those ghostly figures might take us through some audio storytelling back to moments in time where we're seeing things like some historic stills and historic video that bring to life what was there in the past and how that's changed over time as our ghosts share stories from the past. We've been then looking at that too from places like a meteor crash site where we similarly use that gaming technology to have a meteor come out of the sky and crash on the site. And we'd be able to see the layers of the pit, the crater that the meteor left, which is now covered by a waterfall. We'd be able to see all that by holding up the phone. Last night, I started to dream about ways that this could be used in Egypt. I started thinking about one of my favorite places in Egypt, Wadi El Hinton. And sorry, go ahead, Fadi.
Yeah, I think we're familiar with that. And as soon as you said, this, and I saw the photo, I think tons of opportunities are there. I just can imagine, the Wadi Hitan and Fayoum, this area. What do you have in mind for this area?
One of the things when I was walking through the valley, I'm a bit of a biology and nature nerd. So I was getting the sense of how old an ocean floor we were walking on and about some of the exciting parts of the evolutionary evidence there, of where there's evidence of land mammals going back into the sea, creating early whales. How cool would that be if you can actually hold up your phone and you can see scenes of that evolution playing out in that space? But also the guides that I was with were limited in how much they could answer because they weren't themselves biologists. They didn't have that background. So if some of the voices of the scientists that have been there and have studied the fossils that have been found, and as they share their theories and their hypotheses, you could hear and see that through your devices, that would be so cool. I also then started to think, because one of my dreams for when I return to Egypt is I would so love to spend a night sleeping in the desert in Wadi El Hinton. As I started thinking about this last night, one of my favorite AR apps at the moment is they've got some really cool ones around stargazing. There's this one called Skyview, and hold it up and you can see all the different constellations that are up in the sky above you. I started thinking about adding layers to something like that if you were out in the desert, where you then have the addition of the storytelling of the stars that you're seeing. And maybe you could almost take in layers of art with that too, and music, where you get a whole experience in the middle of the desert. And you then add in layers from different tales of ancient Egyptian gods and goddesses, add to the magic of a whole night that you could spend out there in the middle of the desert. Not that you really need any more magic to that, but I just started to dream up all these different possibilities. I don't know if it would work because I don't know if you'd Well, mind you, it might if you've downloaded it beforehand and you don't need a cell signal. But it also occurred to me, I wonder if when you go inside one of the pyramids, if the augmented reality could work on a device going inside, where you could actually even see, maybe follow the procession of a pharaoh being laid to rest within the tomb. Sorry, this is the kid in me who, when I was exploring ancient Egypt, I was fascinated by it as a kid. Well, still am. The different traps being set up to protect the tomb as they're going out. Or there's so many different possibilities of all those different opportunities of what's possible. What are you seeing as the opportunities out there at the moment?
There are limitless opportunities. I mean, I thought about Luxor and Aswan, and the tombs. When you go into the tomb and see like the festivals that were being held back then. So there are, the sky's the limit for the options.
Yeah.
Erika, you just ignited the imagination inside the brain of each one of us. Each one started building his own stories about the places where I love to go around the pyramids here and there. So everyone translated the location into a story, I think.
Yeah, and then I think where the big opportunities with a lot of this exist too at the moment is where you can find those elements where you're marrying story with technology that works and somebody who's actually done the user testing. So obviously with Egypt, the issue with glares on your phones and making sure that there's ways that people can escape the sun at different points in time, so you're not having to stay on the schedule of the thing, you can go in and out. Those are definitely issues that you're going to need to tackle. But you're used to using these devices in the sun anyhow, so you probably know what works and what doesn't work with glares on phones and different devices there. But those are just some things to start thinking, because I think that's been one of the hiccups that's been happening along the way, is that user testing, people haven't spent as much time on it as they need to. There's opportunities, and there's opportunities galore. As soon as you just start letting your imagination go, as your journalism students too, even more recent events in Egypt, like while I've been off in the land of, because it's been where my head's been on natural and cultural history storytelling, which so many opportunities in Egypt, but it doesn't have to stick to that time period at all. And in fact, I was reading when I was doing some research last night to see what's been happening in Egypt around augmented reality. This isn't a storytelling piece, but one of the people who developed that whole idea of using augmented reality to figure out purchasing pieces of furniture to put into your apartments and homes before you actually purchase it, so that you can use augmented reality to see if it fits. That was actually developed in Egypt.
We just saw that, yeah.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah.
So that leads me to, because I know that you typically have an assignment for the week after I had a class together. So I've got this 2-part assignment. The first being to go out, because I think to really think on what works and what doesn't work is you kind of need to have some different experiences yourself. So my suggestion is to try to have 2 experiences this week. And I've got this Google Doc for you, which has some experiences that you could have on your living room through a device. Although if there is anything happening around about that you could actually have where you go out and experience it, like I did at those gardens, I highly recommend that, because it's so much more of an immersive and interesting experience than I find what's through the experiences they can have in their living room at the moment. That's the first part. And looking at all those different things, like what's the problem this is solving? Big question. Why is this something that needs to be an AR, a VR, an MR project? And looking at, would another medium be more effective in reaching this goal? Because I don't think you should create AR just to create AR, because it's expensive and it's finicky. So what is it? Why is this an AR, VR, or MR project? And then the second part is dreaming up something. Think about an idea that you want to pitch to the class of something that you yourself would like to create. I've got all of this on a Google Doc. So if people have things they want to add to it, things that you find so that you can share with the rest of the class, feel free to add to this document. It's also got some of these additional resources on there, like all the sort of free resources for learning Unity and learning Unreal Engine on there. And then it has some other augmented reality creation tools. I have not used these ones yet, so I don't know how effective they are. You can share your experiences once you have them. My email is on here, and I am always happy to chat about this stuff. So if anybody wants to chat about this, starts going down any of these different rabbit holes and wants somebody to bounce ideas off of, I am always thrilled to.
You united our experiences and our thoughts. You did a massive job inside our brains right now.
Oh, and I'm sorry, I'm looking at the time and I totally went way over. My apologies.
No, right at all. No, not at all. I think maybe I have like 10 more minutes if anyone has any questions. Because I have a question myself, which was something that we were discussing before you joined us. How would you relate this with the upcoming metaverse? Did you start anything working on that world?
So the metaverse, I see that a bit more virtual. That's more virtual reality than augmented reality. I've been running some experiments in terms of the metaverse with a couple different ones. So one, I've been kind of exploring that whole world of NFTs as a way of actually raising financing for some of the storytelling projects I'm working on. We did a first round where we did we're looking at it for a nature series that we're doing. We did a first round of it where I had an artist develop some pieces of artwork from one of the first seasons of our series. And then I looked at how could I sell these to kind of use them like almost like a crowdfunding way to raise financing through NFTs. But people like to purchase NFTs that are individual. And so I would have had to have charged like huge amounts of money for every single image. And I'm not famous, so I didn't think that was gonna work. So I then learned about, and I don't know if any of you have learned about this yet, but you can actually auto-generate some of those NFT images, and you basically create different layers to the images, and then you run them through this auto-generator where it creates this what's called generative art. So we've been doing it with these owls. And with these owls, we have different layers for their bodies, for their beaks, for their eyes, for silly accessories on them, for the backgrounds, for the log, whatever they're sitting on. And in a couple of seconds, you can create literally thousands of these images that you can then sell as NFTs out there. I'm playing around with that on some environmentally friendly chains, and then looking at focusing on the social good aspects of what we're raising money for, as well as putting a portion of the funds back into the communities that we're filming, specifically towards either environmental or indigenous projects or charities in that area. And then our young artist for that, he's studying art therapy at the moment. So we're also putting a portion of the funds that we earn from those to go back towards his art therapy education. I've been writing up some of the steps along the way to that. I haven't written up the last step yet, but if anybody wants to learn how to do that, I need to write it up at some stage of the game. So I'm happy to write that up, and I'm happy to share that with you. Also happy to kind of walk you through the steps online if anybody ever wishes that. So there's that aspect. And then through some of the stuff I've been doing with Interledger, I've actually been hosting galleries in Metasphere spaces. I've been using Spatial so far to be setting up these galleries. It's kind of fun. The only problem is you have to have a good, strong internet bandwidth in order for it to work. So I hosted a gallery this summer where I basically, for different people's digital projects, I hung a picture associated with them on the wall in this metaverse gallery. And so it was quite cool because I created like this it was quite a beautiful gallery, like of all different people's work from around the world. And then because like these people weren't actually like necessarily artists, they were more storytellers and journalists and people like that. So I then had a little kind of where you would put the thing for their art on the wall. I had like a little like title to the project and then description, and then there was a link that went to the project. So the way sort of people interacted with the art is they'd wander around the room looking at the art like you would in an art gallery at a party, but they would click on the link and that would take them to the person's project somewhere else. But being in the gallery, you physically had this avatar that could walk around, and you could, by hitting different keys, you could like dance, which was really kind of funny. And you could talk to the people in the room. And it was fun setting it up too, because I could put little, just like you would at a regular party, I put out drinks and food in different places. The only problem, I also added a dog and a cat to the scene, but you couldn't actually pick anything up. So there was all these little disconnects. There's these fun parts, but then it didn't really allow you to physically engage with the environment, which all of us wanted to do. And it didn't also, the other part that it didn't allow us to do is it didn't allow us to move the way we wanted to move. So you had to move within the parameters that the metaverse allowed your virtual self to move.
But that's fair enough with the current state of the technology. I think that's a fair enough experience. Very interesting as well.
Yeah, Spatial is free right now. And so you could even try it out by having one of your classes in Spatial and try the experience yourself in one of your classes.
Yeah, we didn't think about it, but I might think about it. Yeah, okay.
It's all free to sign up for, and they've got different spaces that you can utilize for free in there as well. So you can set up your own little lecture theater. I think there was actually one lecture theater that was up on top of almost like a mountain or something, which I was looking at. But when I walked to the edge of it and then looked down, it actually gave me vertigo. So I was like, okay, this is a little bit scary. So
it should be.
It's so I decided that one wasn't for me, but it was quite a beautiful space all the same.
Yeah, okay. I'll consider that. I'll have a look at that. Great. Okay. Thank you, Eric. Any questions, any thoughts, any ideas?
It's like a reflection of the examples you just mentioned of your different experiences about the different virtual augmented reality experiences that you've been through. And it was not yet that perfect in regard to user experience. Do you think we're not yet well developed to have the virtual and augmented reality in our world, so we can have a good experience with?
I think we are in a zone where we're just on the tipping point of that. I think in the next year or two, I did a fair bit of research into whether what I wanted to do, whether the technology exists, and it does. It's just, it's not hugely accessible, and you're not getting any synergies and teams coming together that have the knowledge based skills and are complementing each other in it to make it happen. And because you've got this hiccup where a lot of the earlier companies that have the abilities to make this stuff happen right now are going to the industries that have the deeper pockets money-wise. But the technology does exist now. So it's just, I think it's bringing the right teams of people together and thinking on those pieces that, like finding the solutions for those pieces that are typically causing the problems in AR at the moment. In my research, I actually found a company here in Vancouver, and I think it's actually, I put it on the sheet, that's got the closest thing to what I'm talking about right now. It's called Questapon. I put it on your list of apps to look at and start exploring and discovering. I think there's going to be an opportunity in Egypt for this at the moment too. When I was doing my research last night, because of COVID and now because of the Russian war, Egyptian tourism has been going through a tough patch. And one of the things I discovered last night is they actually have been putting money into the development of, they said augmented reality, but I think some people don't understand all the different terms. It might be more virtual reality, because I couldn't actually find an example of what it was, but they've been putting it into medical tourism of these augmented or virtual like experiences. So I think that there could be opportunity there with funding attached, but I think it also couldn't hurt to play around with starting to create some of your own experiences to start with, using those things like either Unreal Engine or Unity to create experiences. You can do it in web AR initially. That's not as expensive, where you then use it through QR codes and web AR, where you can create kind of like an art installation in an area that shows what you're capable of, to then take that step for the bigger financing to do something like create like an app like the one I'm dreaming up at the moment.
You made us all dream of such apps right now.
Well, yeah, in Egypt, so many opportunities there. Like if you were able to create that, you could like do a ton of storytelling throughout the country and in other countries around the world.
Although the challenges are exactly what you mentioned, can be related to funding, can be related to internet bandwidth and stability, internet access. So more or less the same hiccups, but maybe more hiccups, or let's say more challenges can be here as well. So,
yeah. Well, and I think that's why probably like, when you're looking at that one MRR experience that I pointed out, that one was inside the museum. And I'm guessing part of the reason why it was inside the museum is because it was a more controlled environment, right? That
exactly, yeah.
Fewer challenges.
Exactly, yeah. Okay, I think we are very, very, very thankful. Thank you so much, Erica.
Oh, I enjoyed this, so thank you for inviting me.
We enjoyed more. Looking forward to all these rich resources that you can share over Google, and I'll share them with you. And whenever you have this new suit over there, let us know. And if you're
I will.
Please let us know as well.
I will do that.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Thanks,
Bye.
Erica. Enjoy your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.